Hey, I want to jump in real quick. Somebody asked me the other day, what does the Corley Company do? Well, we do three things for nonprofits. One, we facilitate meetings, yes, like board retreats where we discuss governance and strategy with all the members of the board. Number two, advise CEOs and help them as they make decisions and implement actions to drive their mission. And then finally, we produce podcasts such as this one, but also for a number of nonprofits to help you get the word out, get your message out. So if you're interested in any of these services, please feel free to reach out to Michael at thecorleycompany.com. Now back to the podcast. All right, on this week's episode of I-501CU, the podcast for nonprofit board members, I have the distinct pleasure of interviewing a longtime friend of mine who sits on a number of boards and also is well known along the west coast of Florida as he is the managing editor for the Business Observer, my friend Mark Gordon. Mark, welcome to my podcast, and tell us a little bit about yourself and your career, which I find is fascinating, and how you came to serve on nonprofit boards.
Awesome. I will definitely do that. Thank you, Michael. It's really a pleasure to be here. And I know we're going to get into podcasts, and I do have you to thank for helping me get off the ground with, I know we're here to promote your podcast, but we do also have the From the Corner Office podcast, and you have played a big role in inspiring and helping me for that. But okay, so tell you about myself. So I am the managing editor of the Business Observer, and it's part of the Observer Media Group here in Sarasota, and we, the Observer Media Group, some of your audience probably knows, has the Sarasota Observer, the Longboat Observer, and the East County Observer, and those are specific hyper-local papers that cover very specific neighborhoods and towns. The Business Observer is a little bit different in that we cover the west coast of Florida, 9 counties from Polk south to Collier. And the idea of our paper has always been to write for business leaders, stories about business leaders for business leaders. And the idea that you can learn something from a company in Bradenton, even if you're in Lakeland. And if you're in Lakeland, you can learn something about a company in Collier County and vice versa, and be informed and inspired. So we try and write stories about entrepreneurs, how-to stories. I have been with the Business Observer since 2005, so almost 20 years, and I love it. I get to, it's a window into somebody's life every day. Even Michael, back when you were in the corporate world, that is how we met, as I recall, one of your companies, and you were gracious enough to talk to me about your business and kind of what you guys did. I believe it was Progressive Employer Services.
It was,
if I remember
yes.
that right.
Yes.
And yeah, so that's kind of a little bit about me.
Yeah, we had a lot less gray hair back then, but it's been
We did.
an interesting ride. And so you're still there at the Business Observer doing absolutely incredible work. I encourage every listener to read that weekly. It's quite informative and it's positive. That's what I love about it. But Mark, throughout that, you have interviewed a number of leaders, and you're a leader yourself. You've ascended to that at the organization, and you're busy guy, but you serve on nonprofit boards, and even sometimes multiple nonprofit boards. So why does Mark Gordon take the time to serve on nonprofit boards?
Yeah, I was looking at it in the prep question, and I was thinking about, okay, why do I do this? I think a little bit of his ego, I guess, when it starts out, when somebody says, hey, do you want to be on my board? I'm like, okay, that sounds interesting. Tell me more about it. I'll give you an example. Jewish Families and Children's Services, JFCS of the Sun Coast, which I've been on their board since October 2020. But I knew their previous board chair. This is going back about 5 or 6 board chairs ago. Some of your audience might know him. His name is Steve Seidensticker. He owned Libby's Restaurant, some other restaurants, and I'd written about him a bunch of times, and I got to know him, and he passed away probably 5 or 6 years ago now. But he had sort of talked to me about just like, have you ever thought about being on a board? We talked about Judaism and Jewish culture with him, and he's like, I'm the chair of this board. And honestly, until he brought that up, I had never really thought about it. I think I thought that boards in Sarasota, honestly, I thought they were more for older-ish people with a lot of money. And yes, I do have the gray, but I didn't know I was of the age yet and sort of have something to offer outside of funds, because we have a young son that we want to put through college someday soon. So I didn't think I was like board material, to be honest with you. And then, like I said, I didn't join that board when Steve was there, but they actually had reached out to me, somebody I knew there, I think in the HR department there. Hey, we're looking for board members who live in East Manatee County. And I was like, huh. Well, I talked to Steve about this, and it's sort of the timing was right, and I did it.
I love it, Mark, because there's so much wrapped up in what you just said, whether you know it or not. And that's people who think they're not board material. And boy, that
Yeah,
couldn't be further from the truth. And yes, we all think it's these older people, but boards are starving for that diversity in age.
yeah,
Bringing in people, and for you to carve out time to do that is really special because you bring a different perspective to it. And you don't have to be these ultra rich that everybody
right.
thinks serves on boards either. And the advantage you get, and you know this, is somewhat it's the career development aspect of it. You get to associate with people that have been very successful.
Yes. Yeah, no, I've learned that as I've been on a couple of boards, and I've learned a lot. I know we're gonna get this a little bit. Like I've learned a lot about myself, like sort of finding my own voice. Something I remember from interviewing business leaders, executives over the years is the admiration that people would have for somebody who they'll say, "Yeah, he's great in meetings because he only talks when he has something really important to say." And so that's sticking out in my head. And I feel like the first few board meetings I was at, I said nothing because I didn't know like if I had the confidence and sort of the and there's as I've listened to you talk on your podcast, Michael, there are people at board meetings who talk about everything all the time. And I don't think that's my personality either, even though I host the podcast. But actually, I should say it is because on my podcast, I ask the questions and then I shut up and listen to the answer. At least I try to. So that was hard for me in the beginning, being on a board, like finding my voice to say, okay, I'm gonna weigh in here because I think I have something important or intelligent or articulate to say.
That makes sense, and that's humility. And board members should be humble, but always eager to participate and contribute. And so I think that's wise that you listen the first several, but over time, like you do, you find your voice. Now you're in the business world. You write about business leaders. You have served on boards of business organizations, 501c6s, but you also serve on 501c3. You just mentioned JFCS. So, can you compare and contrast that a little bit? Is there a difference in board service that you observe between those two types of 501cs?
I think there is. I think the biggest difference I have seen is in how financial information is relayed, understood, digested, talked about. On the 501c3 side, I find that there's a lot of discussion, talk, budget talk, especially specifically to JFCS. We underwent a change in terms of we had a CFO and now we outsource it, and so that took a lot of effort. I mean, I didn't have anything to do with it on the internal level, but as a board member, I knew how much was happening behind the scenes to go from CFO to basically a fractional CFO firm that's amazing and doing great. But there was a lot of effort and a lot of time spent on the board understanding what they were doing, which I really liked, and I thought was really good because this is obviously very important. I feel like the other boards that I've been on, Lakewood Ranch Business Alliance and Visit Sarasota County, not that the budget's not important, there's still fiscal responsibility, but it's very specific part of the board meeting and it's a very specific part of the board documents, and you look at it and it'll come up in the meetings. Hey, I had a question about so and so. You guys went to England or did this trip. Tell me about that. But it's more a minor part of the discussion. So that's been one change, one difference. I think pretty significant.
That's interesting, and that makes sense the way you articulated that. Now, going back, so you're on these boards, two different sets of boards. Is there anything that sticks out that you've learned about either the board, the 501c sector, board service in general? Where have you learned and grown?
Um, I've learned that I think stubborn or people that are digging their heels in a certain position, it's very challenging to get them off that position. I've learned that. And I think that just it came up on sort of personnel matters, right? I think we should have this. I think the CEO should be this person. I was involved in one CEO change. Actually, each board I had, now that I think about it, because I was at the Business Alliance when There was an executive director changed to a CEO. So those were complicated, difficult discussions. And what I learned was uh, even when new information is presented, some people are like, "This is what I want to do, and this is what I think we should do," and I'm not really gonna look at that other new information. I thought some of it sort of came off as uh, a political. It wasn't political in terms of right or left, but it reminded me of, this political fights that you see on Facebook that I don't engage in, but I read, and no one's going to convince A of B, and B is not going to get, you know what? So it's like I saw that at board members, and so that struck me as interesting. I feel like I'm pretty as the way I live my life, I'm pretty flexible and open to changing my position on something when new information comes in. So that was one challenge, and I think I sort of went off your question.
Well, because we think, no, you didn't go off topic, because we all think, or at least on the outside of 501c3s, that, oh, they're immune to politics, they're immune to arguments, oh, they're lovey-dovey. And the fact of the matter is, it's humans, human nature, and so you've got to know how to navigate and manage that. So tying it back to what you always talk about from a leadership perspective, leaders need to rise above, focus on the mission, and really try to corral that board to at least be rowing in the same direction. And it's challenging, even if you're in the nonprofit sector.
It is. I just, as you were thinking too, it's a good analogy. We use this a lot at the Observer Media Group and definitely at the Business Observer. Why would readers well, we use a certain word, but why would readers give a hoot about what you are writing about? And that's a constant thing. And it's funny because we've had new reporters come in and they're like, they've worked at other papers, other media organizations where the reader or the audience is not first in the mind. They're writing for themselves. They're writing to win awards. They're writing for, and I'm like, no, we're a reader-focused organization. We're only doing this to provide a service to readers. And I think that's, sometimes you don't see that on the boards. I've learned that like, who are we working for here? Like, are we talking about the end users of your nonprofit? Are we talking about your ego and things like that? So it does, board dynamics. I've learned to kind of watch that happen.
Yes, and that's what gives consultants like me a living quite a bit. Good work. So you continue to serve on boards and just help maybe the executive director, CEOs out there, or board chairs out there. As a board member, what keeps you energized and engaged?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think board camaraderie does. Like, I like knowing the other board members. Like, I like being involved, when figuring out like what people are doing. I like getting to know them. So I feel like shout out to Kathy Roberts, who was the board chair of JFCS, and she's rolling off in October. I mean, she still is now, but she's rolling off. And she had a big challenge because JFCS board meets virtually and in person. And Kathy and I talked about, there was a lot of people sort of took advantage of the meeting in person. And for the very beginning of that sort of post-COVID time, we were still a lot of us virtually, and I was in person, and it didn't have a good feel to me. And I think the more people we got in person and did like a cocktail hour at somebody's condo building and things like that. So I think engaging with the board is really important to me. And I think the other thing that I've learned of being on a board member that I would say to a CEO of a nonprofit is make it conversational. Like, make these board meetings not just somebody standing in front of their, here's the budget, here's this, here's that. Even like the member moments, I think those things are great, especially at JFCS does so many things as new board members. It has been challenging to get out there and do our elevator pitch. We have a veteran services program. We have a fatherhood program. We have a homeless program. Like, we have all these things, and the membership moments are great, but I think they're even better when they're conversational with the board. So it's not just one person talking. So I think engaging the board in that way, so you look forward to coming to the meetings if possible.
And I'm glad you're saying that, because that's really fallen off since COVID, that intentional engagement. And Zoom becomes an excuse not to meet in person. And it's really been detrimental to board camaraderie. And I've noticed over the past year an effort afoot from at least my clients to restart that, re-engage, let's do some stuff in person, and people are much more willing, and they're actually craving that. Maybe not every
Yeah.
board meeting, but sometime we've got to meet in person.
Yes. Yeah. I think that helps for sure.
So you touched on this a minute ago. I'm just curious, what do you think makes a good board meeting? What makes a good board meeting?
A good board meeting. Well, yeah, I'll give another shout out to Richard Russo, the Russell, he's with Sarasota Opera House, and he's the board chair of Visit Sarasota, and
Yes.
he just started, and he's running as board chair, and he's been on the board for several years, but
Yeah.
he's right on time. So on time has got to be key. I'm sure you've heard this from other guests. I think I've heard this on your podcast. On time is key. If it says 8:27, you do it at 8:27. Keep it moving. Try and keep people tangents down to a minimum. I think there's always that board member. I was in the car with my son, Aaron, after a board meeting once, and I was telling him there was somebody. I don't know if I should talk about this publicly. I guess I can. Whatever. I'm not going to name names, but there was somebody on the board who reminded me of that kid in school when you were done with class and the class was over, and somebody would raise their hand and ask that last question, and you're like, come on, like we had our books packed up and we wanted to leave. And so I'm not going to say which board, but there's somebody on the board that would do that, and you need a board chair that could reel that in. I'm not saying it's easy. I've never been a board chair, so I'm not saying that would be easy to do. You got to deflect it the right way. But so I think in running board meetings, you got to keep that chatter out. Like you got to keep it hyper focused on why you're there.
Yeah, respectful of everybody's times. I love that you drew a perfect picture there. I remember people like that in school. That was too good. So, what board meetings upcoming? You get your board packet, I guess. How does Mark Gordon prepare for a board meeting?
I try the best I can to read more than a day or two in advance if I can. I don't like the hurry up and wait. I've learned over the years I like to read it a little bit more in advance, so like 1 or 2 days. I don't read. I do read a decent amount. I don't sort of memorize or to read the whole thing. I try and bring it with me, but I prepare by reading. I think that just is the reporter's instinct in me is like, let me figure this out first on my own. What I can figure out, so I have questions or things like that. So preparation, reading beforehand.
Yeah, it's good. Honoring the duty of care that's embedded in Florida state statute for nonprofit board members. For those of you who
Yes.
care about that, the duty of care. So you talk to a lot of people. I'm sure you get this question. If not, I'll be the first one to ask it. What advice do you give to somebody considering joining a board or maybe about to join a board?
I don't think I get that question a lot, but I think I can answer it.
You will now.
Yes. I I think the first advice, again, I don't know how super original it is, but I think the first advice would be find, two things. Find something, some entity, some purpose that means something to you would be first. And then if you can, sometimes you can't know that until you're on the board, but find people that you connect with. I'm not saying you have to like them, they have to be your best friend, but I think for me in the beginning of JFCS, the board definitely skewed to a elderly population that were retired, and these are great people, and I enjoyed being around them, but it wasn't sort of a common theme for me, so that was hard in the beginning. So if you could find those people of common interest, but I think the organization's mission and vision, so I would advise somebody look at that, understand that, know what that is. Do your research, figure out. I've been on the governance committee of Visit Sarasota, so we've gone to other potential board members, Aaron Duggan and I, the CEO of Visit Sarasota, and said, like, here's what to expect. We have 9 board meetings a year. They start at 8:30, and I'll give my shout out to Richard and say he runs a great meeting. It's the meetings are fine, and there's some work and there's some committee work. But the mission is really important. I'm Jewish, and Jewish values are important to me, and that intrigued. That's why I started talking to Steve Seidensticker in the first place. And so I think if you find something that you're passionate about, I would advise that, and then do some research about the board and what it entails. Oh, and one last thing, I would advise somebody, especially if it's government or public, figure out if it's sunshine or not and what sunshine means. Because I think even though I've been a reporter in Florida for almost 20 years, and I think I know a decent amount about that, I've been in board meetings where they bring in, Michael, I know you've done this a bazillion times. They bring in the lawyers, the experts, and I'm like, really? You can't even do that? Like, so I would advise somebody don't get scared of it, but understand what sunshine is before you get into it.
Yes, Florida sunshine is something to be cognizant of, and you can work. I've seen boards navigate it extremely well, and most people do honor, at least make a point to, but it's something you need to have in the forefront of your mind. It should not dissuade you from joining a board, just need to understand it, right, Mark?
Absolutely. I mean, we like I said, at Visit Sarasota, we had our annual attorney come in, and I learned something new every time. And yeah, you have to be, I don't think you just have to be careful. You have to be careful. You have to be cognizant of what the rules are. I think once you're cognizant, you're good, but
yeah, well stated, and I appreciate you saying that. So any last parting words before we adjourn, Mark Gordon?
Well, I said I would get into, we didn't really get to that part. My last parting words would be major thanks to you, Michael. I had the idea of a podcast for almost 4 years. It was a goal of mine. It was the top of my goal list at the Business Observer and the Observer Media Group. And I saw your podcast, started listening to it, and I called you one day. I remember because I had just dropped Aaron off at guitar lesson, and I said, how did you do it? What did you do? And I don't know if you remember this, but you said to me, embrace the suck in the very beginning. And it's like anything else. It's a startup. It is hard to get started, and you just got to get over that. And you have a uber talented producer that you introduced me to, who happens to be your son. And shout out, I'm doing shout out. So shout out to Reed Corley, because Reed has been a great partner with me on the Business Observer from the Corner Office podcast. So that would be a parting thought, was just thank you for your advice and friendship and inspiration, and introducing me to your son.
You're too kind, Mark. Really appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, Mark Gordon, the managing editor for Business Observer, part of the Observer Media Group, and podcaster himself from the Corner Office. Go check it out. And this is Michael Corley, and I will 501 see you next week. All right, wonderful discussion with Mark Gordon. Now it's recapping with Reed. And I guess you all picked up on it. Reed actually works with Mark and produces his podcast. But Reed, interesting. So what are the 3 observations you have of our conversation with Mark?
So the first observation was that even somebody so far into their career as Mark was, and so connected, he still sat on boards and had insecurities about what he was able to offer for them, or even insecurities about joining a board in general. And it just proves that everybody has something to offer a board. Like, do not be afraid to join a board, to seek that out. You have something to offer.
Very good. I can't elaborate on that. Number 2.
When you're on the board, remember who it is you are working for. Is it your clients? Or is your board focused on patting themselves on the back? Remember who it is that your board is working for.
Boy, if every board member just maintained focus on the mission and for the greater good, boy, we could really move the needle on some things. And number 3.
And as we've said many times before, what makes a good board meeting? Start on time, end on time, keep conversation moving, keep tangents short.
And Mark summed that up nicely, didn't he? And there you have it, recapping with Reed. And we want to thank Mark Gordon for joining us on this episode of the I-501C, the podcast for nonprofit board members. And we'll see you next week.